So I'm going to talk to you today about relationships with councils. So I'm assuming for those of you that are in the UK, you'll understand some elements of what a district council does. And for those of you that are international, this might be quite useful for you to understand the different levels and tiers of government. So I'm giving you some unique insights that I've had over the years of working with strategic directors, planning managers, heads of planning, heads of departments, and just want to give you an overview of how local government works. So let's jump straight into it. So I want to sort of just briefly go over sort of the what, the who, the why, and the where. Okay, so in terms of the what, in terms of if you're looking at doing even as little as simple as an extension or a conversion or a development, the what you need to consider, the who you need to think about, and the why you're developing this, and the where, so the location of it in more detail. So I'm just going to go over briefly with you. And again, if you've got questions, feel free to type them in. And I'd love to know if some of you are already in property and you're doing this right now, or you're buying your first buy, whether it's your first buy to let, whether it's doing developments, pop some comments in there and let us know what you're actually up to right now. I'd love to hear. And it's great to see so many of you online today with us. So let's start with the what. Okay, so before we start with the what, let's think about which council does what exactly. So in the world of government, you understand that there are lots of different tiers of government, and it can feel quite confusing. I mean, over the years, representing a community here in Oxfordshire, it was a pleasure sort of doing that for many years. However, people would contact me from all walks of life, asking me to try and help and support them as their local district councillor. Now, what they would do is they'd contact me and say, "Oh, Imran, can you help with this? I've got there's a highways issue in our area, and can you help support that matter?" But not realising that the role that I played within one particular type of local authority didn't deal with highways. So I just want to briefly explain that there are mainly sort of 4 tiers of local government. And I think it's really important to understand this. So if you're a property investor, because you need to understand which authority you go to, and I'm going to come on to more detail in a moment on that. So you've got the 4 tiers, and I would start with parish. So parish is what I would call, if you think about the UK map and think about, let's say you think about Oxford, okay, where I was born. So you have Oxford, for example, and within Oxford, there are lots of small mini towns and villages. So a town or village might be a parish. And within a parish, they'll have a local council group. And that council group, I would call them the activists. They're the people there that if you're putting in a planning application, they'll be the ones either supporting or opposing it, and possibly forcing your application to go to a committee meeting where someone like me historically would have either voted it through or rejected it. So they're really important people to care about, because we need to understand what's going through their world if we're going to developing in their area. So they're sort of the sort of bottom end of the spectrum in terms of the activists. Are the people that we need to be mindful of when we're putting in planning applications. The next level from there is district or borough, and that's the level that I sat on. So district or boroughs are where they represent, so for example, Oxford City Council is a district or borough council in effect. Birmingham City Council, similar type of concept, and they will do things like planning. I'll come on to that. They will do more like planning, building control, leisure facilities. So they tend to take more strategic decisions about where we build houses and what we do. A lot of the contact that you'll have is with normally a district or borough council. So if you're applying for a HMO license, for example, if you're doing HMO strategies, then you'll be going through that local district council. Their health and safety officer, their environmental health officer will be reviewing sort of HMO regulations and strategies, because that's what HMO licensing is all about realistically. It's about the health and well-being of those tenants. So a district and borough council is very much where you will spend a lot of your time and energy. And then you have county councils. Now, county councils are where they will deal more with highways issues, schooling matters. So if you're looking at building, if they're looking at planning out where the new schools go. So if you've got a, say, a flip strategy, and county councils tend to monitor the schooling system and monitor how schools perform, and they manage that process with Ofsted. Now, if they're looking to build a new school, let's say you've got a potential flip deal that you're looking to buy in a particular street, and you've just seen the county council starting to work through building a new school, then if that's going to be a school of excellence or something that, a new academy, then that might be a great strategy for you to buy that property and sell it on, because if you're selling it to a family, again, you're thinking about your end demographic in mind. So counties tend to deal with the highways matters and deal with schooling mainly. They deal with lots of other things like gravel extraction, but that's not as exciting for you guys today. But what's important is when you're submitting planning applications to, say, a district or borough council, if there are highways matters to consider, which in most applications there are, they will consult with the county council, and the county council will give highways feedback. So things like, are the vision displays for the road correct? Is there enough waste turn movements for a waste vehicle if you're doing something a bit bigger, like a larger scale development? So you must be aware, whilst you'll deal mainly with a district or borough from a potential investor point of view, the county plays quite an important role from a highways perspective, because that could be a reason for an application going through or not going through. And then you have the other level, which is unitary. And unitary is something that's appeared mainly over the last 10 years, where governments have said to all councils across the country, and I've seen this through when we manage the finances of the local authority, where we've had to make severe sort of cutbacks, and they've asked authorities to maybe consider going unitary and partner up, share services to be more competitive when we're going out to tender for waste contracts, for IT contracts, for example, and give better value for its customer. And its customer, I guess, is you and I, the resident, the people that live and we pay our council tax for. So a unitary is a mixture of mainly the district, boroughs and counties coming together and all being in one building and all being together. So the local authority I was part of, we were going through a plan to consider the options of going unitary with Oxford County Council. That never happened in the end. Of course, you can imagine it's a whole political beast to deal with to try and negotiate how the deal would be struck. But two of our authorities actually, so we merged, so two district councils, we actually merged together. So all of our teams merged together to obviously do a cost saving exercise, but trying to obviously provide better value and services. So unitary, you may deal with them because it might be that the planning department and the county departments are in one building. I think that's actually a positive thing because it's easier for them to interact and communicate with. So I just want to share with you different tiers of government so you understand the process, understand where you might spend your time and who you deal with. So again, if there are any questions, pop it in the chat box, which is great. So great to see you here, and which is cool. Oh, great to see some comments here. So Helen, got some bike-lets, that's amazing. Good relationships with the council are crucial. Is this working the same way as the whole of the UK? I'll definitely come back and answer those questions. Andrew, great to see you here. Great to have you on, buddy. I haven't seen you in ages. So I will definitely come back and answer that question. So the question actually you're asking, Helen, is this working the same way in the whole of the UK? So pretty much. Scotland, I guess, will be slightly different in terms of its structure, but their councils will be like a district or borough that will go through a planning process. I've not personally put in a planning application in Scotland, so I couldn't give you the absolute definite answer on that. But in England, in particular, in England and Wales, most authorities work to a very similar process where they follow what we call National Planning Policy Framework Guidance, which I'll come on to in a second. And again, type some more questions if you've got them, guys, and I'm sure Hayley will help me later on answer those if need be, if I've missed any. So, key council departments. So as I've mentioned, there are sort of three key main areas, and you will have interaction and touch points with all those authorities. So if you're thinking of putting in a planning application, or you're thinking of developing or doing a conversion, you need to remember you're not working with one council in isolation. This is very much about relationships across the board. And I meet so many investors that sort of, sadly over the years, they've been blinkered to say, okay, I just work at the district council. I don't need to worry about the community. I don't need to worry about the parish because they're not relevant. I just need to get this through. I need to push an application in, get my architect, get the planning consultant and move it ahead. So this is where I want you to think about actually holistically, you need to look at everyone in this process. So the district and borough, the parish and the county, they all interlink in some shape or form. And you, the investor, need to be at the centre point of that process. Now, the key council departments, this is something I really want you to consider when you're looking at doing deals in your area, wherever you're buying in the UK, or even if you're working with the power team, sourcing agents, you need to really be clear about what that council's plans are for the future. So I've highlighted a few points which I think might be helpful to you. So the first one is the planning and planning policy. So in each local authority, there should be something called either a local development framework plan that councils might be going through right now. Some councils will already have developed their local development framework, and that will come into their local plan or their unitary development plan, UDP. Now what's crucial is this sets out the framework for where they're going to build the next X number of houses in their region, but it also sets out the framework for other areas, not just housing development, but potentially leisure improvements, highways improvements, their regeneration plan for an area. So it's a really, really useful document to highlight and look through when you're thinking about putting in applications, okay? Because what you can do with this information is when you're thinking about applications, you're taking into context the council's local plan. Your planning application needs to consider what's their regeneration plan for the area, what's the goals that they've got in terms of housing mix. Because if you're thinking of planning an application for, say, I know, let's say you've got a piece of land and you in a particular part of Oxford and you want to build 10, 6-bedroom detached luxury houses. But in that local plan, they state that in that particular part of Oxford, they want to get more starter homes coming to the market. That's their goal. So again, you're conflicting straight away because in your vision, you're thinking, oh, amazing, I'm going to secure 5 plots here, make a load of money through developing them. But actually, we haven't even thought, well, what do the council actually want to achieve here? What do the community want to achieve here? So really think about it from that point of view, and then you've got more chance of getting something through planning and developing something out that hopefully will still generate you a great return. So local development framework, local plans and unitary development plans are really crucial. What I would say to you as well is most councils have something called council's design guide. And we all have ideas of what a design should look like. Architects come up with glamorous designs for buildings, and I've made mistakes with this over the years as well, where maybe we come up with a design that we think, wow, that's stunning, that's glamorous, but it might not tick the box for the local authority. So it's really important from a design point of view, if you're working with an architect and a team, that they understand the design guide and that the design is sympathetic, is probably the word I'm using, sympathetic to the area, it blends and fits right. And don't get me wrong, in certain parts of the UK, like for example in London, if you're developing sites there, London can be, in certain council boroughs, can be quite flexible. So they don't mind mixing some traditional with some very modern. It's about understanding each borough and what the local authority wants through their design guide. So just really, if you can, look through that when you're doing your deals. Housing and regeneration. So this is probably one of the most fundamentals, as I've mentioned before. You need to understand the housing needs of that council. So like I said, if the need, for example, I'll give you one of the examples in Oxfordshire. About 7 years ago, we carried out a report that highlighted the need for more care provision in our region. So if I was a developer at that time thinking, okay, I can see a need here, the council saying, and the reports are saying we need more care provision in our region and we are not providing the buildings or the space for it, then the council obviously would try to look more favourably at those types of applications. And interestingly, of course, what was happening is the odd developer over time were coming forward with a new care home facility. I had 2 literally care home applications opposite each other on one side of the street and the other side of the street, and actually both of them went through. So from that point of view, you can understand why that care provider was looking at what was going on with the council, looking at the housing needs and the mix that the council wanted, and trying to tick the box for them. So really be clear about that. Really understand the supply requirements. So this is a bit technical, but what I would say to you is the central government changed policy a few years ago, where they stated that local councils were targeted on the number of houses they needed to deliver. And we have what we call a rolling 5-year land supply. So each council needs to demonstrate in their plan that they have enough land available where they can build a certain number of new build homes every year to hit a target. If they don't have that 5-year land supply, then actually it means their local plan is not in favour. The local plan actually is defunct, and a developer, a property investor like ourselves, can put in an application which might be a bit more speculative, and we might have the chance to win through either appeal, or even if it is refused, we can win through the council, because they might say, as a council, we can't show a 5-year land supply. And just to explain that in a bit more detail. So what the government did is they said every council needs to show that they have enough land to build a certain number of houses every year to hit their target. So they said to each council, if you're going to build 100,000 homes over a 5-year period, that basically means, each year you build X number of houses to hit that target. But the problem is the council don't build the houses. It's the developer that builds the stock. So they could show all the land in possibility, all the land that's out there, but actually if the house builders don't hit those targets and those numbers, And if you think back to the last 30 years, we pretty much haven't anyway. And I'm sitting on boards telling people this. We need to think about this more creatively. We need to consider whether we as a council become a developer. Do we start developing houses to try and meet the targets? But of course, that's a very different conversation for a council, because they don't tend to want to be developers. They want to deliver what they're good at. So that's quite a lucrative thing to think about. That if actually the council's not hitting its targets, that could be a great opportunity for you as an investor to come and put in some applications and get things through, which normally wouldn't get through the planning process. Okay, so consider that, consider the demographic. The last point on this particular slide is about economic development. Okay, whenever you're putting in an application, okay, and I will come on to this, it's really crucial to think about the economic development and think about how will this application benefit the community? What's it going to do? What's a tick in the box for them? Because you've got to prove that to a local authority. It's really important. Planners want to see that. The parish council want to understand that even if they're not happy with the scheme you're submitting, what benefits will they get out of this process? So I really want you to bear that in mind when you're doing these types of deals. That's really crucial. So the what. Okay, so when we think about the what, I really want to think about what is the proposal you're looking to currently bring forward. So if you're thinking about a piece of land, or you've got a house where you want to buy the house and build 2 or 3 properties next to it if it's got a large plot of land with it. So what is the proposal you're thinking of bringing forward? Really think holistically about the site and think about what's here currently. So even if it's a conversion deal, buying one building, convert it into apartment, think about, well, what other conversions have happened nearby? What's the potential of development to happen here? You know, what's the demographic mix in the area? And if you're going to convert into apartments, but most of the houses are suited to people that are, you know, reaching retirement and looking to sort of still live in maybe larger homes, am I going to get this through the planning process? So what's the size of the development? Is the size in keeping with the area? Okay, that sort of sympathetic nature that we want to do bold things, nothing wrong with that, but is it in keeping? Because that's quite an important factor depending on where you're developing these properties. And I'm going to come on to the who. And this is quite an area where, you know, let's think about the people that are around us, okay? So let's just think for a second and type in your comments here. So if you're thinking about the people that you might need to interact with, what will they be? Just think that through in your mind. I'm going to ask you again in a little while, okay? Think about the people that we need to communicate with when we're submitting planning applications. So the who, this is really crucial. So whenever you're looking at putting in a planning scheme, think about not just the people that work at the authority, like the planning managers, the planning officers that you're dealing with. Think about those people that might end up making a decision on your application. So the district councillors are people that are elected, you know, to sit in planning committees and vote through on applications. So it might be that one of your applications is going to be sat in front of them, and if they've never heard about you or they've never had any dialogue with you, they're not going to know what your values are. They're not going to know why you're wanting to do this. They're not going to know what your long-term plans are for the area. They might just think, hey, I hate to say this, they might just think, hey, we're greedy developers, we just want to make money here, right? And of course you want to make money from property, but they want to understand the value behind it. So please remember to also communicate with those politicians. It's really important. Also communicate with the general public. Neighbour residents are fundamental to this. If you're doing it, or if you're using your team or your architect or a consultant, get them to communicate with the neighbouring residents. These are the people that are literally going to be there with their sort of pickets, shouting and screaming, saying, well, they don't want something to be built. So you need to communicate with them and find a win-win scenario. That's really important. Also in that area, there might be stakeholder groups. So there could be people that are looking to, I'm thinking of a stakeholder group. Let's say in Oxfordshire, for example, there would be a group that are very much about sort of going carbon neutral and make sure there's no sort of, you know, everything has electric vehicles in certain areas of that community. So again, simple things like if you were developing properties, should we be putting electric charging points on the outside of the properties? Should that be part of the planning application? Because again, that ticks a box to enable that stakeholder group to feel more comfortable with what you're submitting. So bear that in mind. And then at district and borough level, consider the heads of service. So you can normally find on most district council websites a management structure, and you can normally find out who the heads of service are. So you can be that little mini 007 spy, find out who those heads of service are, and you can communicate with them. The head of planning, you can give them, you can write to them, tell them about your vision of why you're wanting to develop this. Of course, you will still submit it through the planning officer, but it might be the head of planning or a planning manager which has the final say. So do bear that in mind when you're submitting applications. And then the why. Okay, so the why for me is, what do we need to consider when we're communicating with the council? And this is really crucial. So language plays a huge part of this. So whenever you're communicating with the council or you're submitting to an application, sensitivity is really important here. And the right use of language is crucial. So whenever you're putting something in, it's all about balance, and that's crucial, okay? And you'll see this in terms of when the council are communicating with you. When the council are writing reports, they might use terminology in their planning committee report like, on balance, we feel that this will not meet the criteria for the local authority. So that term on balance is really crucial, because balance is an opinion. And everything that we do through planning is all followed and based on what we call the National Planning Policy Framework, the NPPF. So that's government guidance, and then each council interpretate that government guidance for us to then create our local plans and our planning policies. So sensitivity of language is crucial, and the right use of language whenever you're submitting an application, softer terms, it's really crucial, because you want to build a story through your planning application. That's really important. Also think about the council target. So what's the agenda for the future? What's their regeneration plans that I've mentioned? So that whenever you're submitting your plans, your application, you're thinking about those end goals in mind. You're joining the journey that the local authority has. So your application will say, this helps, support the regeneration plan of X project. This development will support the housing mix and the demands that you have. These will provide much more starter homes for local people. Because many people in local authorities and the residents feel frustrated that people that are moving to these areas are hopefully people that are local. They want more homes for starter families, for people that live locally and that can afford to get on the market. So it's always thinking about that when you're doing a development, and the why is so crucial in terms of the language. Okay. But then there's the where. Okay, so this is what I want you to think about. So where do we consult and in what format? So now I just for literally one moment, this is where I'm going to sort of give you a bit of a test. So think about all the people, if you were submitting a planning application, whether it just be for an extension, like a large extension, 2-story style extension, or you're going to build 1, 2, 10 houses, think about all the people that you need to consult with. So what would be the type of people that you need to consult with? Okay, now make a list. And if you can pop in the chat box now, pop in there now who you think you need to consult with. Let me know your thoughts. So hopefully the chat's working. And then, so who do we need to consult when we're thinking about a planning application? Think about all the people. Think about the people I've just mentioned. Hades has put Imran. Absolutely, yes, you can consult with me. Who would we need to consult? Any ideas, guys? Let's see if anyone's got some thoughts. So I've mentioned 1 or 2, planning managers, but think about externals as well. Town councillors, absolutely, because again, there'll be people that they've got their ear to the ground. Their ear is fundamentally listening to local residents' viewpoints so that you can get there. Architect, absolutely, you need an architect on board. Planning officer, definitely. Anyone else? I'll let you carry on, put your thoughts in there, that's fine. So, in terms of the type of people that I would say you need to consider going out to, okay, and the methods that you do it. So we've talked about the people that you're putting in, that's great, but think about the methods, the where and how we do it. So think about letters. So if you're communicating with these types of people, think about getting letters out to them. Think about holding stakeholder events. So maybe even you get your architect to hold a public event where you have some boards out there with your plans so you can show them out there. Think about getting posters out there and communicating with them. The reason I start to say this is because we have what we call Chinese whispers, where communities start to talk to each other, and you might be submitting an application for 5 houses, and then a neighbouring resident hears about this application. They tell their neighbour that you're putting in planning for 5 houses. That neighbour then tells the next neighbour that you're putting in planning for 10 houses. And then all of a sudden, the message gets lost in translation. So the more that you can put out there with a very clear plan, the less likely that that message is very clear and people start to understand what you're developing. So think about posters, online forums, questionnaires, public talks, talking to planners initially, talking to the town councillors at parish level, key senior members at council, key management levels, the head of planning, and a regeneration manager, like the planning region manager for that area. So think about communicating with all those levels, because again, it gives you much more opportunity to get your application through. And of course, again, you're talking to the council, you're saying, actually, as a ethical and decent developer or investor, I have communicated as best I can with all these different bodies. And you can show that as part of your planning application. And if you're sat in a planning committee meeting, being able to share briefly that you have made as best an effort to communicate is important. So I just want you to bear that in mind, which is good. I'm just going to see if there's any other chat points coming on. Solicitor, yes. Solicitor's somewhat important, but not as crucial as I would say the architects, but a great point to throw in there. Okay, so just briefly in practice, how does this all work? Okay, so let's say, for example, and I'll give you an example of a past project, and how you can sort of utilize sort of some of these skills and knowledge that I've had over the years to help you. So let's say, for example, this was a building actually that was partly converted into 3 flats, but illegally. So most investors, if you're a newbie investor, for example, you might look at this and go, I do not want to touch this because someone's partly converted it, a rogue landlord owned this property, partly converted it, did not have planning permission, and of course there's a risk here. So this was a deal where I had to come in, I had 14 days to pretty much exchange contracts if I wanted the deal, but I then had 3 or 4 months to complete, so I had at least a lead time. The risk I had though is that I knew from doing some research before the exchange that the property did not have planning. However, this is where there are opportunities where sometimes within departments, historically, the communication levels and there is some flexibility in the market. So I obviously did some research and I spoke to the owner of the property and I asked him a few key questions. So I said, well, how long has this property been flats? And from what he could remember from when he converted it, maybe 8 or 9 years. And that was sort of initially some music to my ears potentially, because it has been flats for a number of years. Of course, not done to the right specification and regulation, but it has been flats for a while. The second point I raised with him is, how is the council tax allocated on the building? Is it one council tax for the whole property, or are there 3 individual council taxes for each flat? And he said to me, he believed from memory there were 3 individual council taxes. Okay, great. So then I made contact with the local district council for that area, and I spoke to the council tax department first, revenues and benefits. And they explained to me that yes, there have been 3 council tax methods here, but actually what was interesting is it had been flats for a bit longer than the previous owner had said for. And they sent me a really nice email to qualify that it has been flats and we are charging council tax dating back to a certain period. And that email is gold dust to me, that's really important. And on the same day, I then contacted the planning department and said that I have just bought, well, just about to buy, should I say, this building, and I'm aware that it doesn't have planning. Now, this building wasn't on their radar. And the moment I told them about it, it's now on their radar. And for most people, you might freak out at that point, but for me, I didn't. And they said, well, look, you shouldn't buy it because we now know about it. And obviously we want to come in and basically get you to regularize the planning, get you to sort the planning process out here. And actually you might need to turn it back into one house, which wouldn't work for me as a deal. So I then spoke to the planners and said, hey guys, well, actually, you do realize that this property's been flats for X number of years now. And actually you've been charging council tax on each individual flat for many years, probably over 10 years. And the response was, And at that point, he realized that he probably didn't have as strong of a leg to stand on when it comes to the planning process, that I was able to potentially sort out the planning and regularize the planning through development because it's already been there for a number of years and they just hadn't a chance to find this property. Because you have to imagine that in local authorities, there's only maybe 1 or 2 enforcement officers because of the sort of the cutbacks that we've had over the years. So in doing so, I was then able to then take control, regularize the planning and turn this into 3 much better, much more luxurious apartments, okay, which generates, you know, potentially a great profit if you're looking at this as a flip strategy. Actually got a valuation of about sort of £45,000-50,000 more than I actually done in my numbers, which was great. But most investors would walk away from it because of the risk of planning. But I understood with little tweaks where I could try and get sort of almost around the planning process somewhat to maximize it. So I hope that gives you a bit of an overview, and I just want to share you some brief tips. I know we're sort of going on and going through it. So let me just go on to some tips along the way. So a few things I want you to consider when you're doing deals like this, okay, or you're thinking about doing something like a conversion or development, you must do, what I would say is, if you're thinking of buying a site, do your background work on the development cost, in lead times with the conveyancing process. So if you're buying a site, make sure you're doing all your background work. You probably run all your numbers okay already, but literally get all your ducks in a row. So whilst the conveyancing process is going on, whether it's going to take you 12 to 16 weeks to get that purchase across the line, do lots and lots of work behind the scenes. Start to tick off the boxes. So if the site already has planning permission, for example, start to tick off the boxes to satisfy any planning conditions that there are in the development. Another big thing is shop around for the right team. Get recommendations, and do not base your decisions on just costs alone. Because if you're based on costs alone, your team are so crucial to this process. I know Hayley and others talk about power teams, but it's so important to make it work. So do bear that in mind, okay? And think about the feasibility. Is this going to be likelihood to get through? If you're coming up with a very modern design in a very traditional area and street, think about, am I realistically going to get this through? And don't go out and spend and waste money if it's very unlikely. Think about designing something that fits in and is sympathetic to the area in mind, okay? And always think about your end target demographic, making sure that the people that you're developing this project to or converting to are actually there in the market, and it's the right type of property that meets their needs, okay? Because developments and these type of projects take time. They don't happen overnight, and some projects will take more of your time. So I just want you to bear that in mind when you're doing these types of deals. So I do hope that's helpful. And of course, if there are questions, I'm more than happy to go through them and answer them for you. Let's see if there's a few of them coming in, which is good. Haley's being ace, always good to inform them of your rights. Yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes you've got to be a bit bold with planning officers. I think it's a balance of working with them, of course, but I think it's crucial that, understanding what you can and can't do when you go through planning is crucial. I'm not asking you to be a planning expert. I'm just very lucky that I've learned some planning things. I'm not a planning consultant, but I've learned planning because planning managers have taught me some planning over the years. And I try to keep on top of it, now that I'm not with the council for the last 2 years, but I try to keep on top of it and understand what's going on.